Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. This is not a rerun episode. This is me coming out of retirement for one episode only. As you may recall, I retired from this channel and from spoken commentary uh, earlier in the year. And you could probably guess what it is that made me want to come back for one last epilogue. Think of it as an epilogue. Think of it as a added chapter in the reprinting of a book, the book being the Daily Objective, which I obviously played no small role in contributing to over the several years that it's been around. So obviously, October 7th of this, this year, October 7th, very, very overwhelming day. It's just beyond anything. It's like, if it had been on a much smaller scale, it would be horrific, but I would be able to compute it. I'd be able to kind of process it on some level. But what we have is like the equivalent of the so-called crow epistemology, like you can't, crows can't retain so much more than, I don't know, 3 or 5 items at once, right? And that's how we are as humans. We have a certain limit, That's why phone numbers are, 10 numbers long, and we can't like remember our Bitcoin code or whatever. The amount of carnage on October 7th is just beyond comprehension, especially the amount of young people, the amount of children and even infants affected. Is just it's just made the world a place that I just, I keep on kind of wishing at night I might wake up the following morning and that this will all have been a dream. I find myself negotiating with the universe, like, what if this, what if that, could I do this or do that to undo what took place on that day? And obviously many good and decent people feel the same way, in some way or another. And on October 7th, I thought to myself, like, now people get it. Like, now people understand what Israelis are dealing with. I thought to myself, like, now there's no more both sides. You can't use the phrase both sides now when talking about this conflict. Oh, I wish both sides would just stop. There's no equivalent of what took place on October 7th on the Israeli side. You could not produce 1,000 Israelis willing to do what had been done. And against my better judgment, I'll address the tired and pathetic argument people make, yeah, but, civilians get killed over there and over here, and Israel has already killed a bunch of civilians. On a very base monkey level, yes, you end up with dead civilians in all cases. Just like when you pack a family into a chamber and gas them to death, that yields ultimately the same result as bombing a city from whose chancellor decided to purge Europe and killing a family over there. Yes, in both cases, a family dies. But the blood of that family in both cases is on the aggressor, whoever initiated the war, and whoever targeted civilians as an end in itself, not for anything other than killing them with no further goals. So, I thought to myself, now people finally get it. Obviously, I was wrong. And in the first few hours as this news was coming out, immediately you started to see people in London and elsewhere demonstrating in support of the Palestinians. You did not see one sign saying, no to Hamas, yes to the Palestinian civilians. Israel is bad, but, we don't support this, but we do still hate Israel. You didn't see any of that. It was just straight up Palestinian flag, free Palestine. And I thought to myself, this is residual. Like, this is leftover. I thought to myself, this is, the world's not going to change in an instant. I thought to myself, people are getting it, I thought. No, nobody living in a civilized country, very few people in a civilized country could stomach what had taken place October 7th and could continue to voice support for, quote, free Palestine without at least some qualification. Because we see now what free Palestine means. What it means when Israel's border is not secure. We see what happens. We see what people on the other side of the border can't wait to do and would do further if they could. Now, Israelis have always known if they could, they would. If the Palestinian elements, the leadership, the militants, many of the civilians, more civilians than you'd care to admit, if they could, they would. They would kill all the Israelis. They would horribly torture and humiliate Israelis. Israelis knew this for a long time. But the balls on those Hamas terrorists on October 7th, good Lord. I mean, yes, they were cowardly, obviously. It's very cowardly to just target babies, children, women, unarmed people in general. It was cowardly. They were not, they're catching, they were catching soldiers in their bed. They were not entering a battlefield. Obviously, very cowardly. I say the balls on them. Like, I think you understand what I'm saying. Like, I'm beyond words. So I was wrong. I was wrong that now people get it. So first of all, the people demonstrating for, quote, freeing Palestine have only gotten louder. They've only gotten more indignant, and they've only shown increased apathy towards the civilians butchered and slaughtered and raped and kidnapped on October 7th. That's in the West, or that's in the, in the world outside of Israel. That's, the leftists or the pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Among the good guys, let's call them, the people who were properly horrified on October 7th and were, even showing the Israeli flag in various ways. Among them, there was sort of a few days of a grace period, kind of like their attitude was, whatever Israel needs to do to deal with this is understandable. And that, of course, fell by the wayside. I could say, roughly at about a week, you just pretty much October 7th was a faded memory in the minds of many Western pundit and commentator and reporter. It became about, but how can the deaths of Palestinians be justified? This really raises obviously it highlights the fact that people, they don't have the stomach for war, a defensive war. They can't stomach the fact that, if Hitler purges Europe and Europeans bomb Germany, that all the blood spilled is on the hands of Hitler, and as well as the people who in some way aided and facilitated his purge. Tragic it is, and it's all on Hitler in that example. And here it's all on Hamas. I mean, it's just not something people can stomach. They don't want to, or whatever it is. We'll get to a little bit later. Let's hit rewind, and thank you for all the super chats pouring in. I'll hopefully get to them by the end of this episode. I've actually, so I finally visited Israel about 6 months ago. I, you may know, was born in Jerusalem. I lived as a kid for most of the first 10 years of my life. I lived in Israel. I sort of commuted between Israel and the U.S. for a few years. And then at age 13, I left Israel for the final time, actually a couple of weeks before the second intifada broke out. The word intifada then, as today, means attacking Jews and killing as many of them as possible. So that broke out shortly after I left. From age 13 to age 36, I never got around to visiting Israel. Just why that is a fascinating question. I'll probably be thinking about, for a long time. But, I was drawn to the United States for reasons that I, have touched upon both here and in my own thoughts and contemplations. I was drawn to the United States, and Israel to me just kind of seemed irrelevant. It just seemed like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'm nostalgic about or that I appreciate about Israel. And then when it came, to speak on behalf of the objectivist philosophy and how to look at Israel versus, the Palestinians, I would point out, as other objectivists have, Israel has the qualities of a civilization worth morally defending, and a civilization that ought to defend itself effectively. High degree of individual rights being protected, a high degree of trade, which is a corollary of that, of the former. Basically a basically rational, modern, Western Enlightenment civilization. And that all is true and should only be made clearer by the horrific events of October 7th. But, when I finally got around to visiting Israel earlier this year, it was a fascinating experience. If I had been hosting this show at the time, I can imagine I would have done an episode or two about what that experience was like. I'll tell you, the one thing that really struck me was how much these people love their kids, just how much they love having kids and raising them. The playgrounds are like mini amusement parks. They're like mini amusement parks, gigantic, gargantuan play structures, a spaceship, a dinosaur park, whatever it is. They just love building giant structures for their kids to play in. And you see families out everywhere you go, whether it's the religious breeding ground that is the city of Jerusalem, where you'd be at this point hard pressed to find very many secular people there, as regardless of my strong differences with the religious folks. These people love life. They love their kids. Their kids are protected by them. And these are not people who are hungry for violence at all. And then in Tel Aviv, the modern, the sort of other side of town, so to speak, the secular part of Israel. Also, kids, structures everywhere, lots of kids, families out on a Saturday afternoon, hanging out with other families, kids everywhere playing and having what looks like a great childhood. And I didn't even really think about the fact that every couple years these same kids need to spend the night in a bomb shelter for maybe weeks straight because Hamas are firing rockets. But in the eyes of the world, yeah, so what? Israel has the technology to knock these rockets out of the sky, and of course Israel wiping out Hamas will put Palestinian civilians in harm's way. So just stomach it, just take it. The attitude of the world is, and clearly the attitude of Israelis as well, because they don't expect any better of themselves and their leadership. So it was a fascinating experience. Imagine leaving the place where you were a kid and coming back as an adult, and everything that would entail. Going into a bookstore and being like, look at all these books. Just so much has been written and said in my absence. It was a fascinating experience, and it kind of piqued it. It made me more interested in, Zionism, Jews, Israel. It got me thinking about it more and more curious about it. And when I was done with that trip, soon after, I came across a book that I read, and I'll tell you the title. Now, the first half of the title is a lot more fun than the second half of the title. The book is called The Magical Background of Modern Anti-Semitism. The Magical Background of Modern Anti-Semitism. So it was written in the early 1950s. It was a series of lectures delivered in Berlin that was transcribed into a book delivered by somebody named Adolf Lechnitzer. He was a Jewish German who luckily left Germany when he was able to, spent World War II as a resident of the U.S., and then in the early 1950s was one of the first Jewish people to travel to Berlin and get up and lecture and speak. And face what had taken place there and talk about it and try to understand it. So he was one of the first, as far as I understand, and he was quite effective at it. So in this book, The Magical Background of Modern Anti-Semitism, he talks about the history of Jews in Europe, and specifically in the German-speaking parts of Europe, which would become at one point Germany. And he speaks about how the Jews were let out of the ghettos. You know, the Jews were basically kept separate from the rest of European society for much of European history. And then in the late 1700s, the late 18th century, you started to see first certain elites, like certain experts among the Jews, were invited to participate in, you know, mainstream culture because of their expertise, either because they were very good at a certain type of business or because they could help with education in certain areas. And at some point after that, in the 19th century, the general Jews were, you know, the general public, the Jews in general were liberated and allowed to join everybody else. And what you saw was, as this book documents, for at times difficulty to fit in, like not all the Jews were sure what they want to do. Do they want to just assimilate? Do they want to remain separate? But many Jews elected to assimilate. Many married, you know, Christian families. And, you know, this was the Enlightenment century, right? This was the 19th century. This was the good century. This was the one where the influence of the Enlightenment was everywhere. Sadly, the counter-Enlightenment was being sown and brought, you know, into effect. But this was a time when people were kind of for the first time living in the modern world and asking, what's next? And many people, you know, many Jewish people were ready to assimilate and to marry other families and to just kind of put it all behind. But as the author sort of highlights, the Jews were still always kind of the outsider looking in some way or another, even with the best intentions of many non-Jews. It's in some way or another, the Jews were still the outsider. The Jews were in some way different, even if they were completely secular, even if they celebrated Christian holidays like Christmas and even married Christian families and did that. It just there was always a degree to which the Jews were seen as the other. Also politically in the German-speaking world, which would become Germany, the average person, the middle class, didn't really have much influence on politics. A place like England, you saw the average person having much more impact on politics. But in Germany, it was really just the elites. And then sort of almost overnight, they went from an elitist political system and then in the early 20th century, suddenly everyone can participate in politics. And now it became a real rabble-rousing game. These German masses had no experience with participating in politics because they had been, kept outside of it as far back as the eye can see. So now you had all these people suddenly with a vote, suddenly with the ability to impact politics. And what you had also was a welfare state. You had also a lobby system, which comes with the welfare state. You have politicians trying to inspire hillbillies everywhere and tell them, if things are going bad, guess whose fault it is? If you're poor, it's probably because this guy is rich. If you're seeing somebody pass you economically, that's a problem we can help address. So Germany, the land of poets and philosophers, became a place at some point in between World War I and World War II when you started to see seemingly civilized human beings driving down the street, walking down the street with loudspeakers, rousing people against the Jews, saying things very similar to what you might hear today from an anti-Israel march or from, the doldrums of the creepy alt-right or from, leftist professors talking about their emotional reaction to October 7th. And of course, there were plenty of very decent people in Germany who were shocked as their Jewish neighbors, and who told their Jewish neighbors, we're ashamed to be German right now. Like, we can't believe what we're seeing. Plenty of German people did not want any part in this scapegoating. But obviously that was not enough. That was not enough to protect the Jews. And the Zionist project had been in place for a while by that time, because people like Theodore Herzl had noticed that no matter how civilized people seem to get in places like France and elsewhere, you still see people acting downright barbaric towards the Jews when, I don't know when they're under pressure, when they're drunk, whatever it is, when their mask slips off, people are being unbelievably hostile towards the Jews, and the Jews cannot leave their fate in the hands of other people's goodwill. That was his conclusion, Herzl, and the Zionist project, I think, was validated, to put it lightly. I think it aged well, seeing how things went in Germany. So yeah, you had very brave people in World War II hiding, the famous Anne Frank in their attics, hiding Jewish people under their floorboards, risking it all, risking their lives for their values. I know if you have a mature understanding of objectivism, you don't see that as self-sacrifice per se. It's standing by your values when you hide the innocent in your home, or hide them anywhere. But that's not enough. That's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it. What is enough, what is necessary, I've come to the conclusion, as have many before, and hopefully today, the Jews need a designated location where the Jews are not the outsider looking in. The Jews are not the outsider looking in, where the mainstream narrative, the mainstream timeline, the story is the story of the Jews. Other people can move there, which people have done with Israel. You have people who came from Russia, from all over the world, many of whom have no Jewish affiliation, but they, for one reason or another, successfully immigrated to Israel. And this includes many Arabic people who are, either Muslim or Christian, who are part of Israel proper, who send their kids to the same schools as Israel, who speak the same language, Hebrew, modern Hebrew, whose kids grow up alongside their Jewish counterparts, and they all speak the same language, and some of them marry, some of them form families together. They become Israelis. They all become Israelis in the same way that, let's say your family moved to the United States in the 1920s. You still talk about the American founding fathers like that's part of your story. Or you can see an equivalent in any country. People who immigrate to the U.S., the American story is all of their story. And that's what Israel is to people who live there. The story of the Jews. They learn about Jewish history. They learn about, they're learning about Napoleon. They're learning about Napoleon's relationship with the Jews, and so on. They learn about Zionism. They learn about the establishment of Israel. They learn about the history of Israel, the various wars, the various events that took place. And the Jews are not the outsider looking in Israel. And I see that as a necessary and a worthwhile cause. Again, I'll underline necessary. So I think I've evolved on this because previously my defense of Israel was basically, it amounted to Ayn Rand's defense of Israel, which was these are civilized people. They're clearly into building stuff. They're building. They're more or less free by modern standards, by today's standards. They're more or less like a Western European or American style country. And the people aggressing against them are very clearly advocates of, a return to the primitive. So therefore, you ought to support Israel, whatever problems they may have, whatever reservations you may have about Zionism itself. But I think the facts have been on the side of Zionism, and Zionism contains a lot of disagreement. The Zionists, many of them in the past and to this day, disagree. They all agree that their goal is to get away from anti-Semitism. But what is their goal to move towards? That's a big question. You've had a lot of different thinkers and a lot of disagreement, and it's a question that continues to fester. But there needs to be a country where there's just no question that anti-Semitism is real, that it did sort of inspire an exodus from Europe by the Jews, and that there needs to remain one country, at least one place, where a boat of Jewish refugees is not going to be turned away, which is exactly what happened in the United States and in Palestine, in British-controlled Palestine. Boats of Jewish refugees came escaping the Nazis, and they were sent back to where they came from, because the British had a quota of Jews that they were going to permit. Never again. That cannot be the case. That cannot happen again if if Zionism has any validity, if the Jews can help it. So among the many reactions the many voices you hear today, you see, like I mentioned, the horrific support of Palestinians, aka the voicing of solidarity with Hamas right now by many freaks, many of them. In addition to that, you also see, the moderates, people who say, look, of course, Israel has a right to exist. We don't want to go back any further than the 1967 borders, they say. And they say, we love our Jewish friends, right? I love the guy from the Young Turks, Cenk. He was on Piers Morgan, who is himself a pathetic, flimsy, flaccid excuse of a human being. Piers Morgan is. I speak, concluding from the last few weeks. Cenk Uygur says, look, I love my two best friends in the world are Jews. I've been to the Passover Seder. This is not about hatred of Jews. But I'm sorry, Cenk Uygur, even if that's all true, even if Cenk would hide Jews in his own home when they're being pursued by Nazis, that's just not going to cut it. The Jews should not be protected by Cenk. They should not be protected by anyone but their own military. They should be in charge of their own protection. And that's the bottom line. So when people say, oh, it's nothing against Jews, we love Jews, you need to support the right of Jews to form their own defense department and to effectively defend themselves. Or you're not, you're, I guess, not as bad as the anti-Semites, but you're not much better either. You need to, I think it's perfectly fair to criticize, but criticism ought to be within the context of the Jews have a right to self-defense, and the people they are defending themselves from are beyond irrational and nihilistic and bloodthirsty, which has been made abundantly clear on October 7th, but was actually very clear for a long time before that. So the Palestinian movement, from day one, I believe the first sort of articles of the Palestinian cause were drafted by the likes of Yasser Arafat and his rival Palestinian warriors around 1964. And as Ben Shapiro would say, 1964, you'll notice, is earlier than 1967. It's good to see people like Shapiro and Rubin being earnest lately about something they actually care about. Maybe if Rubin wasn't shitting on Ukraine for the last 2 years, he would have a better case to make about why Israel ought not be invaded by barbarians. But I digress. 1960s and onward, this cause that is the Palestinian movement has always been very clear that their number one objective is to liquidate the state of Israel, nothing less. And, any lip service that any Palestinians have paid to peace and coexistence has been shown to be very clearly disingenuous. The Palestinian movement, it's like it produces this culture that's it represents this culture that is like a black mirror to the Jews. The Jews talk about, oh, we were, displaced from this land in ancient times. The Palestinians are saying, no, we were displaced from this land by you. The Jews say, We were ethnically cleansed throughout Europe, and then the Palestinians say, no, you're actually ethnically cleansing us. There's this very cynical, like, trolly method employed by the Palestinians. Like, they know they're lying, everyone knows they're lying, but they have this, like, seemingly, like, postmodern kind of attitude, like, yeah, we can just invent stuff, and then who knows what's real, right? They're a nation, we're actually ethnically cleansed. We have a right to self-determination. And there's nothing inherently wrong with people galvanizing and call themselves Palestinian because they come from a certain area and they have a certain traditions or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But the Palestinian culture that we have in this reality is an extremely nihilistic and barbaric one. And they are, like I said, a black mirror to the Jews. Wherever the Jews go, they brought prosperity. If you want to know what Palestinians bring where they go, take a look at Lebanon. As to the well-meaning, innocent, and virtuous among the Palestinians, I would suggest watch Mossab Hassan Youssef. He is the son of one of the Hamas founders who's been giving interviews. I watch his interview with the disgraceful Piers Morgan multiple times a day. It's just so uplifting to me. He, because Piers Morgan is so pathetic, he brings rage. He brings righteous rage out of Mossab Youssef. And the stuff that Youssef says are just spot on, pretty much. It's just the level of bravery that we see out of him is generational. It happens every, you see only small instances of it in every generation. People who have the courage to walk away from the world they know in pursuit of a better life for themselves and to advocate for a better world. People who want a good life for themselves among the Palestinians ought to see Israel as a potential liberator, ought to see Israel as a force for good, ought to want peaceful coexistence and trade, which, by the way, is the wet dream of Israelis. They want nothing more than to see Palestinians reach out an actual olive branch that is, without a weapon behind their back. You'd be very hard pressed to find me an Israeli that doesn't want that. You see, radical elements among the Israelis increasingly over the years who just keep on saying, just get rid of the Palestinians however you need to. But even they largely want to just pay the Palestinians to leave rather than, slaughtering them completely. There's no rational case to be made for just slaughtering a population wholesale. What does need to happen is the leadership needs to be hung from the gallows of the Palestinian movement, Hamas as well as the PA, Mahmoud Abbas, who the best thing you can say about him is that he's lazy. These are no less than bin Laden. They are no less terroristic, no less evil than bin Laden. No one ever should have shooken their hand publicly. And, I'm sorry to say the United States in their dysfunctional relationship with Israel prevented Israel at times from wiping out the Palestinian leadership before they were the Palestinian leadership. At one point, I understand in the 1980s, an Israeli sniper had Yasser Arafat in the crosshairs. And President Reagan said, no. I just wish I had been the Israeli commanding officer who had the ear of that sniper. I would have said, make sure to say oops after you pull that trigger. So, yeah, Israel, they've lost their way. Philosophically, maybe they never really quite had their way, but they brought some wonderful values into that region from whence they came. Wonderful appreciation for business, for building, for family, not in a, brutal, tribal, senseless way, but in the rational sense of loving one's family. They brought a very, very decent culture into the region, but philosophically, they really are in need of a good moral code and a good philosophy for living on Earth. You could probably guess which philosophy I'm hinting at by the name of this channel. So Israel, shook the hands of the terrorists. They've compromised with them. America hampered Israel's ability to defend themselves. And, before the nihilistic elements of the libertarian scene and the new right come along and say, could Israel even exist without all the money they get from America? Obviously, they can, not with the way Israel currently fights. But if Israel fought to win, if Israel fought like it is a matter of life and death, if Israel fought like a country that respects itself and has self-esteem and has confidence in its in the moral justification for its self-defense, of course, Israel is the strongest country in the region and one of the strongest countries in the world. And it's because they're smart. It's because they're thoughtful. It's because they're basically free and wealthy, and largely because they use reason rather than faith. Even the most religious among them, among the Israelis, understand that reality gets the final word. They understand that you need to, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. And that's what's made them strong. And Israel would be much better off without U.S. aid. Much better off. It's like a welfare mom, It's like a welfare recipient. The aid that America sends Israel. And yeah, most of that money is then spent buying weapons back from America. But I mean, Israel, I hate to say this, it's a scary thought, but I'd rather see Israel as a pariah in the world with no friends, but with the balls, with the teeth. That I would rather see. And who knows if we're going to actually see that happen. I'm hoping Israel is only starting to wake up. I hope this sleeping giant is only starting to wake up, because the rest of the world stopped giving a fuck after a few days. But I'm hoping Israel is only getting more and more urgent about this whole thing, because recent events, October 7th, it had the horrific elements of the Holocaust. It had the urgency of the 1948 war, the War of Independence, where you had like Israeli civilians, Jewish civilians, like up close, right by the war itself. It had the surprise element of 1973, and it needs to have the victory of 1967, but followed by sustained confidence, sustained ongoing confidence, not compromise, not pragmatism, but moral righteousness, moral confidence, and on some level an understanding that the purpose of a government, of a civilized country, is to protect the civilians, to protect also the soldiers. Obviously, they've already begun to throw that away by allowing missiles to continue flying in from Gaza, which have hit some Israeli cities. The fact that Israel has lost some soldiers in this war so far speaks to the fact that Israel has been willing to basically sacrifice some of its own soldiers for the sake of, not killing too many Palestinians, and also holding on to the good graces of the rest of the world. I just hope that is a residual effect of the past. I hope Israelis are ready for something new. Rational, not belligerent, but something new and a lot more forceful in its defense. I hope so. So, the title of this episode is "Am I a Zionist?" I think of I think of the question kind of like well, who's asking? Like Ayn Rand famously was faced with anti-Semitism in her home. Somebody, like a friend of a friend, or maybe a family relative, somebody made some kind of remark like, "Oh, Hitler should have, finished the job," or something. Hitler was right. Something about indicating that Jews are bad and should die. And Ayn Rand responded by calling herself Jewish. She said, "I'm Jewish, and your words are not welcome, and you're not welcome." I don't remember how exactly she said it, but she called herself Jewish when faced with anti-Semitism. Otherwise, she referred to herself as a mongrel American in one lecture. She clearly had not much thought, not much concern for her ancestry. But when faced with anti-Semitism, she called herself Jewish. And I have a feeling that even if her ancestors had not been Jewish, she might have called herself Jewish when faced with anti-Semitism. So in the first week of the, after the massacre, I posted a meme on Twitter, certainly one in bad taste. I'm not saying this like I regret it. I'm saying, yes, it's, to state the obvious, it's a distasteful joke. I can imagine your shock that I did this. But, so I had a picture of Mr. Beast, the big YouTuber who he does all these videos called things like, we gave 1 million people their sight back, we gave new cars to 100 people, stuff like that. So I put a picture of Mr. Beast, like with the big smile on his face, like the surprised grin, the surprised smile. And behind him, there's like Hamas terrorists walking around Jerusalem. And the title of the video, the fictitious title is, "We let 1,000 Hamas members into Israel." So, silly, arguably, beyond insensitive. I posted this on Twitter, and somebody quote tweeted this and said, "In before the Zionists start crying," right? Like only a Zionist would be upset about Hamas killing all those people, right? It's only the Zionists who were hurt, who should be upset by those actions. He goes, "In before the Zionists start crying." So I replied to him on Twitter. I said, "I'm a Zionist." And somebody replied to me saying, "Unfollowed, and I'm glad that I never bought any of your products." And I replied to him saying, "At least you sucked my dick." Excuse me. And that's my attitude. That's my attitude. So, yeah, I think Zionism, for the reasons stated, above, had a very good reason to come into being. And I think I've matured on this topic because, as a kid, even, I knew Israel and the Arabs are at war and that the Arabs are unreasonable. But what does anti-Semitism really have to do with that? I knew the world is unreasonably critical of Israel. But again, I mean, that's not in the same category as, like what the Nazis did, right? I thought to myself, and at the same time, as I, lived in the U.S., went to high school and beyond, as I came of age in the U.S., I looked around, I said, we're over it. Like Jews, everyone else, we're all just Americans. We're all taking part in modern life. We're all pursuing the American dream. We all get along based on our interests. That's how it seemed, and to a large degree that is how it is and how it was. But no, it turns out all those folks who talked about anti-Semitism and that it's not going away anytime soon, and that don't be naive thinking that you can just blend into the world. I mean, I think time has been on their side as we see recent events. We see how the world reacted to the massacre of October 7th. And we see that America today is not that different from the Weimar Republic in some very concerning ways. And that regardless of what the future holds in America or anywhere, the Jews ought not be left in the hands of the goodwill of other people. That's it. That's it. And someone might say, well, this other ethnic group, or even white people in general have also concerns. I'm not telling anyone else what to do. I happen to think the Jews are a special case, but I can understand, that's biased. You hold the Jews to a different standard from everyone else. You can believe what you want. You can agitate for, a so-called ethno-state of a different group all you want and just see where life takes you. I'm just saying the Jews clearly are not safe until they have their own military and their own free way of life. We had an Israeli on this show at some point who pointed out at one point Israel was on the verge of becoming Venezuela. They were so socialist, and they happily took a turn away from that and have prospered as a result. So, Israel needs universal values. It's not just that the Jews need to be in one place with some weapons. So yeah, next up on my reading list is this book by Yoram Hazony. I don't know what it is in Hebrew, but in English it's Yoram Hazony. He you might know as the nationalist, definitely what I consider a force for bad on the right. But he's debated Yaron Brook, and I actually learned from after he and Yaron Brook debated in Austin a year or two ago, they continued their discussion off the stage. And from listening to them and from asking them some questions, I learned that this book actually influenced Yaron Brook's very old lectures about Israel. He did one called The Rise and Decline of the State of Israel, which is a wonderful lecture. And he told me that this book is it informed a lot of what he learned about Israel. Again, the Jewish state, it's called the Jewish state, the struggle for Israel's soul. And it has, chapters, a chapter is called The Intellectuals' Assault and Ben-Gurion's Response. Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister of Israel. The Triumph of the Intellectuals is the name of another chapter. So Hazony is paying close attention to the intellectual history of Israel, the developments. And, as you may know, Hazony hates Immanuel Kant. So he regards Kant as a rationalist. He prefers thinkers like David Hume and other, empiricists. So he's documenting in this book how the Kantians basically ruined Israel by making it doubt itself. So I think it's going to be a very informative book to read. And I'm passing that recommendation along to you, along with the magical background of modern anti-Semitism. And I never told you why it's called that. I told you about the contents of the book. The author, Adolf Lechnitzer. Now, his name is Adolf. He might be the same age as Hitler. Like, he might have been older than Hitler. Obviously, the name was not taboo when Adolf's parents named him. He notices that it's countries that had abolished the Jews where witches are burned. Places like England that had at one point abolished the Jews completely, where you see witches being burned. And as the author puts it, it's as though in the absence of Jews, it becomes necessary to invent new ones. I don't think scapegoating is an inherent part of humanity. I don't think it's the human way. All right. I think it's what you get in an irrational culture, but I think we can do better. We have and will do better. We're capable of it. We've seen better and will continue to advocate for better. A rational culture, an individualistic culture, that is to say, a culture where the individual's rights are not violated and the individual can flourish, can take the actions necessary to flourish, is not a country, is not a society where, minority groups are scapegoated. So that's why he called it the magical background of modern anti-Semitism. The magic, I think, it refers to the fact that he sees witch burning and anti-Semitism as somewhat related. That is to say, they alternate. People kill the Jews, and then when there's no Jews around, they kill witches. They burn witches. So ask your favorite right-wing charlatans, those of you who continue to follow the scumbags off the edge of the earth. The people like Fuentes who suggest that the Jews were abolished from so many countries through history because they must have done something wrong. Ask them, do you think the witches were also burned for doing something wrong? And start to look in the mirror and ask yourself, like, how did I end up on the same side as people who are behind the witch burnings, are behind the dragging of people, the public humiliation, the just barbaric behavior? What we saw on October 7th. It's medieval. It's also it was happening in Europe not very long ago. The leftists, the anti-colonialists, they say, well, Israelis are colonialists, so anything that Palestinians do is just, self-defense, no matter what. So I wonder, where are Jews indigenous, by the way? Like, where are Jews indigenous, if not in, Israel/Palestine? Where are Jews indigenous? Where can Jews literally exist without their existence being an offense? Eastern Europe? It certainly didn't feel that way. Where? America? Obviously, America is one big colony, right? So where? At the end of the day, people they seem to hold Israel to a different standard. They hold the Jews to a different standard. They have a problem with war, with self-defensive war. They have a problem with planting of trees and building of homes. They have a problem with human beings pursuing the good life if it's being done by Jews. Not all people, but like I said before, there's not enough good guys in this world for the Jews to just sit back and leave their fate in the hands of the good guys. And the good guys should do more than fetishize, weak little girls hiding in the attic. They should advocate for the Jews to confidently build the infrastructure for self-defense and to live long and prosper, and to set an example for other peoples, for other nations around, for nations throughout the Middle East. If Israel had moral confidence in 1967 and in 1973, more than what they had, if they had the confidence to not only win the wars decisively, but to double down and put the fear of God into the aggressors and make very clear that shenanigans will not be tolerated, then the Middle East could look like a very different place today. Here's my call to action for you if you want to make the world a better place. I realized this while watching Yaron Brook. Like many of you, I have been watching him religiously since October 7th. He should start a Hebrew-speaking channel, a Hebrew-speaking YouTube channel, basically a podcast, and just start a channel where the name of the channel is his own name in Hebrew, and he's speaking in Hebrew. And whether he does it once a week or once a day, whatever it is, I think that has a very good chance at impacting Israeli culture. I mean, it's his native tongue. It's he speaks to the people. They get it. He has a point of view that is not very prevalent, to put it lightly, in Israel. And if he impacts people in Israel, it's a small market. It's a small place. What if you start to see people, parroting these ideas? What if you start to see people running for office in Israel on these ideas? That is a very strong self-defense with no religious pretensions. What if you see the advocacy of capitalism by people who are not religious? I really think Yaron Brook should do a channel in Hebrew. But that's where you folks come in. You need to express to him that you'd be willing to fund that. So start super chatting him, say, here's what I'd be willing to pay per month or whatever. Here, like, I would financially support, even those of you who don't speak Hebrew. I think it's a worthy cause. If I didn't speak any Hebrew, I would still want to support it in my estimation. So there's my call to action. Start putting intense social pressure on your own to start a channel in Hebrew. I mean, I would hope it would be an exciting thing for him to do, right? To go back and save the country he grew up in, and by extension, probably the world. Israel is a country of influencers. It's like a country of artists, influencers. I mean, if Israel moves strongly towards objectivism, but in more of a narrow sense, if Israel moves towards winning wars like normal civilized human beings fight defensive wars, that can really impact how America and others think about war. So, food for thought. Thanks for joining us today. I will rush through the super chats. Robin says, hi, thank you for introducing me to Ayn Rand. It is nice to see you here again, even if his own time only. Mark Moses says, great to see you. Iron Meerkat with 15 Israeli shekels says, I feel you there. I haven't felt this much doom and gloom since at least COVID. Yeah, I mean, this is unprecedented. I haven't spoken a ton about my own inner world. I've just never been so sad. I mean, good Lord, the images that came out of October 7th is something I can never unsee. And I wouldn't want to unsee. I don't even want to feel better. I just want to go back and prevent it from happening. Robert with 5 USD says kids these days do not understand war. If they did, they wouldn't dream of sympathizing with the aggressors. Death is what happens when you start a war. Yeah, and as Yaron Brook used to point out in his old lectures, and still, but especially in his old lectures, when Americans throw Israel under the bus and tell Israel to fight with their hands tied behind their back, then Americans won't have the confidence to defend themselves. And what you see is after decades of America cutting off the balls of Israel, then 9/11 happens and America is weak in its response, weak and unfocused. Nicholas, thank you for 10 euros. Wes with 10 USD says, nice to see you. Hope everything has been going great. Since your retirement from ARCUK, my retirement up until October 7th, I've been playing a lot of golf, spending time with my grandkids. I just really enjoyed retired life. Thank you. Marilyn with $5 says, great to see you. Wish circumstances were happier, but happy days are ahead. I think, those who fight for the future live in it today, as our channel's namesake once said. Mark Moses, thank you for 10 USD. Jonathan, thank you for 99 cents. Really stepping it up with the financial support there, Jonathan. Bonnie with $2 says, welcome back. Maybe not for the last time. Don't hold your breath, folks. Walter with 2 euros. Thank you for that. Marilyn with $4. Catherine with $1.99 says, thank you for your thoughts. Well, you are welcome. Thank you for listening. Marilyn with $1.99. Apollo Zeus with £2 says, how do you think conflict should be resolved? The good guys need to win. Israel needs to identify that the Palestinian movement itself is everything I've said here today. The Palestinian movement is a force for destruction whose goal is to liquidate the state of Israel. And then they need to fight like other victorious nations have fought. Read Nothing Less Than Victory, which I have not read yet, but Netanyahu has, although he apparently didn't learn anything from it. Kirk Wilcox with $1.99, ending the show strong. Thank you all for joining us today. It's been really nice to see you. Like I said on my farewell episode, there'll always be things we never got to say. We're always going to want to come back for one more, moment of intercourse, but such is life. Coming up next at 6 p.m., which is in like a couple minutes, the reality show on the end of the UN. That stands for United Nations, by the way. Then at 7 p.m. UK time, it's premiere of a new video on the Briefly Objective. International law is not real. Well, some people think that the state of Israel is not real. So am I real? Hashtag postmodernism. All right. Yeah, I just want to say in the moment I have left, I was laughed at on this show, laughed at and dismissed for saying that Republicans are basically no degrees of separation from the alt-right. Anyone involved in political life as a Republican has either a relationship with the alt-right or is friends with someone that has a relationship with the alt-right. And that's a sad fact. I was laughed at. I was dismissed. So take a look at how Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are reacting, the abject apathy they have towards the events of October 7th, and ask yourself, do you really not believe my eyewitness testimony when I tell you Republicans could give a shit less about anti-Semitism or anything? They only care about beating Democrats and furthering their own careers. So on that positive note, not that I'm holding a grudge or anything, that's all the time we have, pretty much. Thank you all. And I really just can't think of any other updates. I celebrated 12 years of sobriety, continuous sobriety, even in these worst of times, even in this emotional turmoil. There's no escape. There's no escaping reality. I don't want to escape reality. I don't want you to escape reality. Life, even sadness that is unobstructed, feels better, so to speak, than fleeting, evasive joy. So join me. Let's live. And we will surely meet some of you as we trudge the road of happy destiny. Thank you and goodbye.